for an East Coast attack, right?
Well, no, not necessarily. They were still very, very heavy here because they wouldn't let us go through there. And we were making tremendous efforts to get through there. So they landed in Anzio.
Yeah. The map here we're just looking at is sort of something to jog our memory and clarify things in our minds. Here's Rome here in this brown region on the map of Latium. We're down here in Campania where the first landing was.
Then we went up to Anzio up in this area to kind of,
Anzio.
yeah, to kind of go back their lines. And the army was very disappointed because Clark insisted on keeping them tightly in an area and to dig in because he figured the Germans would shoot them from the hills. They had the advantage of being in the hills. But the army found out Germans weren't there and they wanted to move out. Clark wouldn't let them go, and they were stuck there for. Then the Germans did come back, and they really plastered them. And all the people that I talked to that were trapped on Anzio said if every third, they claimed every third shell was a blank. And when we would landed there, had built out our airfield, they had paths that we couldn't walk because it was all live ammunition. They thought it was that live, but they didn't have time to check it out. But we did see a bunch of 88s and all the big shells that were blanks. And the Polish people that worked in their armored factories that made these shells would have notes in there in these shells, and they opened them up, to dismantle them so they wouldn't explode. And they'd find these notes from the Polish people that we got your Germans, So, and the army fully believed that if they didn't have so many blanks, that they might have a lot of them perished or been thrown back in the sea because they let them have everything there. These poor guys lived in foxholes, dug under the ground, and then it rained, and their outfits were full of water. And boy, every time I flew over them, I'd be so thankful going back to the tent and the cot. And they were still there for, I don't know how long, they were 6 weeks at least.
The Anzio beachhead, you were stationed right behind the front like you always were.
Well, we finally had in the latter stages of it, when they started breaking out, the Anzio, we had a base there.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of risky because they had the Free French. See, they wouldn't put the Free French in the front lines. They wanted to help us. But there was no contact between the Free French, and so they put them in anti-aircraft facilities, guarding these airports. Every time we moved, guarding the airfields. And many times they'd fire at us. They didn't know we were German planes, because the Ju-88 looked very similar to our planes. And one time a British pilot was coming in, and they opened fire on him, and he was coming in to land after a mission. They opened fire on him. He gave it the gun and went around, and he couldn't. The plane was so shot up that he couldn't. So he crash landed it at night, and they went back to see the plane, and neither one of them, either the pilot or the RO were not hurt. And when they went back to see the plane was an absolute loss. Not only from the bullet holes, but from his crash landing. But they got out of it safe. That old bowl, if you had the chance, you could skip that thing on the ground. It was safe. But they found 370 some odd bullet holes in that outfit, and not a one of those guys got hit. They were just all over there, complete. They could never understand why they didn't get hit.
The Free French, they shot at you also.
Yeah, they shot it. I was coming a British plane and I were coming around to land. We'd go in the afternoon and check our planes and have a practice mission on each other to check our radar. And this British plane was ahead of me in the pattern. I would be a mile or so back of him. All of a sudden, I looked over there and I see tracers going up between us. And I called him. I says, "Hey, somebody's shooting at you." I thought they were shooting at him because it was closer to him. And I figured I was going to be there pretty quick. They're going to be taking a pot shot at me. Well, they had three French guarding a prison camp right near our air base. It was where the prisoners of war were in there. The three French guarding them. They thought we were German planes, and they were shooting us in the pattern with our wheels down. And I complained about it, but there was never any contact from our outfit to theirs. They'd go to headquarters, and you'd get your orders for the headquarters, but no radio contact. But we got down. Neither one of us got hit. I looked at our plane, and he looked at his. That's funny. It wasn't funny then, but it was an oddity.
At some point, the 415th split off and went to France, and you were based a few places there as well after D-Day 44. But I'm going to actually back up to training. I want to get an idea of your progression, and then I'm going to ask you some different style questions. Let me ask you, when you were in training, you were a young kid. Were you writing home at that time? Were you writing to grandma? Were you writing to your parents?
Oh yeah.
You feel homesick?
Not so much to my parents because we were the letter writing type of people, or Slavish people background. But I did. Yeah, Iris wrote to me almost daily, and I would, of course, I'd answer. And the mail was always. It came in spasmodically. You'd get 3 or 4 letters one day, and then another week you wouldn't get any, and then you'd get another group of letters, but every day everybody waited for mail call. Oh my, that's wonderful to get those. And I suppose that our letters went back to them just the same way.
What were your parents' reaction to you and Rudy going off?
Well, my dad died in March, and the day after the funeral, I left to go to service. I had already enlisted, and they didn't have room for me, so they made me wait at home. They come to call me.
Right.
And then my mother, she knew the words. She took it pretty good.
Now, Rudy was, were you very much in contact with Rudy? And
No, Rudy didn't go in the, he went in the Navy, but he didn't go in for probably another year or a year and a half. And he went in at least another year before he volunteered to go in. And he went into the Navy, but he was one of the guards on the convoy ships. They'd have about a crew, maybe a dozen Navy boys with rifles on convoys. And he's sitting there waiting for torpedoes to go through White Mountain. It was absolutely silly because they had rifles and so forth, and maybe a machine gun. Well, what could they do against submarines and then battleships? If they were caught. But and then most of the time he rode on a gasoline tanker. He was telling me, and if they ever got hit, it was gone. But he went to the Pacific and went to Europe a couple of times and did convoy duty. I wouldn't have liked that at all.
Well, you traveled from Florida to Brazil, to Africa, to Italy, to France. Did you try many of the local foods? Africa? You try any couscous or?
No,
You always-
Africa was such a desolate nation. And, oh, gee, I went into a city, in the city of Dakar, it was filthy. That kind of wiped us out of going into. Algiers was a big city, and a lot of the guys, the ground crew would go in there, but I wasn't much to go into town. I had a day off, I'd relax around the cot and stay there. You want to get some rest because it was trying times, and you want to be ready to operate when you were ready to go. So I wasn't one to go in town so much.
So the food that you were left with were often the military
Yeah, rations. Yeah.
rations. You're mentioning your downtime. What stayed laid around, rested? Were you reading anything? Were you reading newspapers, Stars and Stripes, any
No, we
news?
didn't. We were always so far front in the front lines. We never got any news at all.
You got no monthly publication
No.
or anything like that? Where you could,
We were right behind the front lines.
so
Oh.
how did you keep up with current events, if at all, or were it through letters exclusively? Were you getting
It
letters?
just,
through?
Iris would write almost every day. And in fact, I think she wrote every day.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno, signora. Yeah, see. And she wrote just, I'm pretty sure she wrote every day, but the letters would come in bunches, after the, but as far as we're concerned, we get, where we got news is through headquarters. We didn't have news come down through and let us know what was happening in group headquarters, echelons, let you know from the orders.
Mhm.
That's about what we had.
How did having grandma back home affect what you were doing in your off time? How you tried to keep yourself safe or out of trouble in your downtime, or
Well, we were pretty lonesome most of the time. And it was hard. It was hard.
Food in Africa was no good. Did you have some Italian food?
When we came to Italy, we did go to a couple of the villages for Italian food, and we got some good Italian food, mostly pastas, that they're noted for, and then their breads. But it was rare. Didn't get in very much.
You did have a special meal though. You had a lobster one day.
Well, that was on Capri, in R&R. And we've been in combat for quite a while, and so they decided to give our crews, after so many missions, they would send the bomber pilots and fighter pilots home. We were a group by ourselves, and they didn't have any set up for us as far as the relief time. But eventually, when we were in Migliano, they said, well, we better send some of these crews. They've been hitting it pretty hard for a while, to get a week or so off. So they sent us we got on a boat and went to Capri. And Helen, and then there was about 3 or 4 of us in that group. And we landed in Capri, and we climbed up the mountain. It was just a walk path up to this beautiful hotel, and that's where we were stationed for a week. And that's where Hooley asked me, "Have you ever had lobster?" And I had never tasted lobster. Of course, he was from the West Coast where they had lobster all the time. He was from a pretty wealthy family too. So he said, "I'm going to order some." So they ordered it, and they brought the whole thing, fresh lobster. gee, was it good. It was terrific. And then we, on one of the days, we went to see the Blue Grotto, well, the I call them gondoliers, but they were just an individual with rowboats, took us in there. It was world-renowned Blue Grotto, and we got to see that. It was nice. And then we, of course, went back to work.
This is another sort of a lighter question, but did you have any lucky charms or superstitions or things that you brought with you along on the plane?
No,
Uh,
didn't think of those things at all.
I didn't think you'd say yes to that, but I really asked you that question more to ask you if you saw some weird ones in the other guys. You see those guys doing anything as a superstition or always carry a lucky picture? Or...
I can't recall of anything. Nothing comes to mind of in that area, but I just can't recall. Later on, they used to give us guys would come down and someone would be shaking pretty bad, and they'd give you supposed to be a little shot of whiskey. That it was quite a lot later on. A lot of part of mostly in Germany, I think, southern France and Germany. And most of the guys would save it up, so they had enough, make a glass full or something like that. Then on their day off, they'd hoist it. It'd be a day of rest. So,
I read a book about the Battle of Britain and the bullfighters' role in that, and I was surprised to hear how they'd have a beer and go fly. There's no organized restriction or
no.
But the guys you may see that went into town, there's no time limit or drink limit or anything like that.
See, in the first, in the British Air Force, their attitude was only royalty could fly all the upper echelon. Then they had a group they called flying sergeants, the peons, the normal people. They wouldn't give them officers ready to be flying sergeants. But as they wore on, they needed more pilots. So then they kind of eradicated that thinking. But it was finally all the officers initially were real wealthy people, and they bought their way into the Air Force. So that was unusual.
1944. I don't remember the previous time before this, but was extremely unique, and just for in the natural history of the world, where Etna and Vesuvius were both erupting at the very same time, and you dealt with both of them that year. As a pilot, you don't want to be flying into volcanic ash because it'll rip your engine apart. What did you guys do about that? Was it a big factor? And
well, in Etna, there wasn't any flying done in our area. We happened to be on the windward side of the island and of Pompeii, Vesuvius, and the ash went the other way. We did get some, but it wasn't real bad. But we didn't do any flying because it was too hard to fly. And by the way, we had the same thing happen in Africa.
Oh yeah.
And they had what they call a sirocco, a tremendous heat wave and wind, and the sand would go up to 10,000 feet. And it was terrific. Nobody'd fly because they couldn't.
Convection would lift the sand up to 10,000?
Yeah, it was terrible. You couldn't see anything. And in fact, we rolled our tent sides down in the heat and just stayed in our tents because it was so bad. You didn't want to be outside. You'd breathe it in, or you couldn't see. And we rolled our tents, and we stayed right in our tents in that tremendous heat. It was something like that.
You didn't have any icing equipment on these aircraft back then. Did
No.
you get into icing?
Oh,
Did
yeah.
you just simply avoid it?
Well, at night you couldn't see it, so we didn't know.
Couldn't climb through it too often?
No, our planes were not a fast climbing plane after they got up above 12,000 feet. It was quite a chore. But up to 12, we got up there pretty good, maybe 15, 2,000 feet a minute. But after that, they were limited. They put it in high blower and go up to, when we were chasing bogies in southern France, we stripped the planes down to get, I finally got mine up to 28,000.
Hmm.
And I never got out of the weather that time to chase that bogey. He turned back because apparently it must have been higher. And I had come down through that mess to land.
Hmm.
Never saw the runway.
Did you see some good icing accumulation on the wings? Or did some of the other guys get in trouble by that? I just wonder if that was a issue.
I don't recall too much of an issue out of icing, although there had to be some.
Yeah.
It was a normal thing. But I don't recall too many incidents of icing on it. I don't know why.
Hmm.
I'm sure there was some.
I often go back to this food question because it's the food's so good over here, and I'm a bit intrigued by it. Sometime between now and back then, you learned to cook, and I was just going to ask you, when did you learn to cook?
Oh, I learned to cook in high school, going to high school. And Rudy and I both got jobs at the Trading Post restaurant in Standish. And first we started as dishwashers, and before long we were both established cooks. I used to make, one time I made about 40 some pies a night for the weekends, It was...
So you're the good kind of guy to make a friend with over here.
So, well, we learned to cook. I didn't mind it. I loved to cook. So Rudy was a real good cook.
We're going to take a break and maybe change the tape and rest up a bit. We'll ask you a few questions in a minute.